The sun had barely begun its descent, casting an orange glow across the sprawling fields of the Double J Ranch. Behind the barn, the hum of cicadas created a symphony of summer, wrapping the small estate in serene bliss. But within the barn's shadow, a different kind of tension laced the air. Jake Thompson, a guy known for his grit and tenacity, was just finishing up the day's work. His rugged hands were caked with dirt, but his heart was light. He felt the weight of the world lift with each hoofbeat of his trusty horse, Buck. Everything felt right until he heard it. A quiet whimper pierced the silence. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on him, whispering through the cracks of weathered wood. But the sound came again, softer this time, more desperate. Jake called, the word hanging in the air like a feather caught in an unseen breeze. He walked towards the sound, driven by a mix of curiosity and concern. He'd encountered his share of strange happenings on the ranch, but nothing could prepare him for what he would find. As he stepped inside the barn, the dim light illuminated the rows of hay bales and tools scattered about. And there, nestled between the bales, he saw her, a girl no more than 5 or 6 years old, with tangled hair and sunken cheeks, her small frame curled tightly as if trying to disappear from the world. She was dressed in a tattered dress that hung loosely, the fabric worn thin from wear. His heart leaped into his throat. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice low and calming. But the girl only stirred slightly, blinking her eyes open, confusion dancing in their depth. Jake took a careful step closer, choosing his movements like a deer hoping to avoid a trap. "You're safe here." He knelt down to her level, offering a kind smile, but she flinched away, pressing her back against the hay. It was as if she recognized the kindness in his heart but had learned to trust no one. He asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. She met his gaze, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and uncertainty. He felt an ache blossom in his chest. The hair on the back of his neck prickled as he considered the possibilities of what had brought her here. He said, his tone steady but earnest. The words fluttered out like a lost bird, filled with a depth of sadness that nearly broke him. Jake was no stranger to hardship. He'd seen the harsh reality of life on the ranch, witnessed the brutality of storms, droughts, and dreams lost. But this, a child, starved and alone, twisted a knot in his gut he couldn't ignore. He'd never had kids of his own, but the instinct to protect rose within him like a tidal wave. "I can get you some food," he promised, his voice suddenly stern with resolve. Standing up, he moved towards the barn door, glancing back to ensure she was still there, still watching him with that fearful innocence. He moved toward the farmhouse, his heart pounding with urgency. Inside, the din of the chopping board echoed off the walls as he swiftly prepared a plate. Eggs, bacon, and toast. He'd always believed in hearty meals, and he hoped the warmth would soothe her. Minutes felt like hours, and as every second passed, he could only imagine the stories she carried in her silence. Once the plate was ready, he returned to the barn, his heart racing at what he might find. She hadn't moved, still huddled in her makeshift nest. "I brought you some food," he said, kneeling back down. This time she didn't flinch. Her eyes widened, and Jake felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "It's all right, you can eat." He placed the plate on the hay, inching it closer to her. She stared at it, then to him, hesitation clear in her gaze. "Go ahead, sweetheart," he encouraged. With the tentative grace of a butterfly just awakening, she reached for the food. Her small fingers wrapped around the fork, pulling it toward her lips. Every bite she took felt monumental, each morsel a small revolution against the world that had failed her. Jake watched, unable to tear his eyes away from the transformation occurring before him. Her cheeks began to regain a little color, her small lips lifted in a tentative smile. He asked gently as she gobbled down the last of the eggs. The name hung in the air for a moment, precious and fragile. "Nice to meet you, Maggie. I'm Jake," he said, allowing himself to smile back. "You're safe here at the Double J." For a few moments the world melted away, leaving only the two of them in that dusty barn, a weary rancher and a frightened child, each healing the other with quiet, powerful moments of connection. But as the shadows lengthened, reality crept in like a cloud threatening to drench them in rain. He finally asked, a knot tightening in his stomach. He needed to know the truth, needed to understand the fears and traumas that clung to her like a second skin. Her gaze dropped, uncertainty shrouding her once bright eyes. I ran away, she stammered, the silence between them stretching with the weight of her unspoken story. Each word felt like an echo of pain, and Jake's heart thudded in sympathy. Not safe. His voice held a steady calmness, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. She whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the barn's dimness. He got angry all the time. Her words faltered, and Jake could almost feel the cold fingers of despair brushing against her shoulder. She took a shaky breath and continued. I couldn't stay there anymore. I saw someone leave a gate open. Her eyes filled, and he could see that old fear flashing behind them like a storm finally ready to burst. Jake felt a surge of anger. Anger at the circumstances, at the helplessness of a child facing such despair. How could someone do that? A fierce desire to protect her from that turmoil flared within him, burning brightly in the growing dusk. Listen to me, Maggie, he said firmly, brushing his fingers gently against her shoulder. You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you. She swallowed hard, another tear spilling over. She asked, vulnerability etched into every feature. Absolutely, he replied without hesitation. Your family now. The idea sent warmth flooding through him. Family could mean everything, nothing taken for granted. He wanted that for her. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting the barn in shades of purple and blue, a protective resolve enveloped Jake. He wouldn't let this terrified girl face the world alone. She deserved more than what life had thrown her way. She deserved a chance. In the days that followed, Jake transformed the barn into a haven. He filled it with any comfort he could muster. Old quilts and blankets turned into cozy corners, and he even rigged up a makeshift table where they could eat, work, and hopefully heal. He showed her how to care for the animals, the rhythm and routine gradually replacing her fears with laughter. Maggie began to let her guard down, allowing small bursts of joy to ignite in her spirit. She laughed at Buck's silly antics, finding solace in the companionship of the animals and the gentle nature of the ranch. Each passing day wove another thread of connection between them, creating a tapestry of trust that had been lost to her in recent times. But as their bond grew, Jake knew the day would come when they'd have to face the ghosts of her past. The week after she arrived, Jake did some digging. He found the local children's services office and learned that Maggie's family had been reported, but no one had truly acted. There were more layers to the story than he anticipated, and slowly, as he pieced it together, the weight of the world pressed heavier on his shoulders. Hey, Maggie, he said one evening as they sat on the grass watching the sunset, her head resting on his arm. She tensed at the words, her eyes darting to the ground like a frightened bird retreating into its nest. Do. The fear sprang forth, raw and tangible. No, he replied firmly, but there are people who can help us. She shivered with the weight of that truth, but Jake refused to back down. They needed to approach it together to ensure that she remained safe, no matter the outcome. The thought of safety became a rhythmic beat in each conversation they had, replacing uncertainty with courage. Together they packaged her story with hope, and when the day came for the first visitor from social services, Jake felt like he was ready to fight for her. I promise, Maggie, if anyone tries to take you away, we'll find a way to keep you here. The lady who came seemed kind, her voice soft and reassuring. Together they shared Maggie's story, the horrors, the fears, and the love that had blossomed like flowers breaking through concrete. When it was over, the lady took a long look at Jake. You took a brave step. I can sense the love you have for this child and how hard you've worked on this, she said, her tone serious yet encouraging. But you need to know that there are rules we have to follow. Jake felt his gut twist at that word. Process. Such a sterile term to describe something so profoundly human. But he nodded, unwilling to let the doubt seep in. Whatever it takes, I'll follow the process. Days turned into weeks, and as they navigated through the bureaucracy together, Maggie found strength in the people who came into her life. They told her time and again how brave she was, how important her voice was. Jake watched her blossom, slowly losing the shadows that had once haunted her. But then came the day when the decision had to be made. A judge would hear their case, and Maggie would take the stand, her eyes bright with both fear and hope. She needed to stand on her own to tell her stories, to reclaim her identity in this new world Jake had fought so hard to create. As they prepared, Jake sat beside her in the quiet of the barn, the weight of the moment thick in the air. "Just be you, Maggie," he soothed, brushing a stray hair from her face. With a quivering voice, she took a breath, her resolve building amidst the uncertainties. "They will," he insisted, fierce and unwavering. "They have to." Even as he spoke, doubt niggled in the back of his mind. But he wouldn't let that reach her. She had to feel the truth in her own heart. When the day finally arrived, they walked into the courtroom, the air heavy with a mixture of anxiety and hope. As Maggie took her place on the stand, Jake's heart pounded like a drum, echoing the silent prayers he whispered. And when she spoke, it was like a floodgate bursting open. Her voice rang clear, steadily painting her realities and dreams. Stories poured forth in waves, carrying all the years of silence trapped within her. The room fell silent, captivated by this tiny, brave girl shedding the weight of her past. That day, the judge listened intently, a guardian of justice and an anchor for Maggie's new life. The decision, when it finally came, echoed within the walls of that courtroom like thunder. Custody would be awarded to Jake, a man who had opened his heart and home without a second thought. As the gavel struck, Jake looked down at Maggie, and she met his gaze with wide, bright eyes. The tears spilled over and joy washed over them both. In that singular moment, the future burst open, rich with possibilities and the promise of a new life. Back at the ranch, the sun began to set once more, casting its warm glow over the fields. The barn stood as a sanctuary, a testament to resilience and love. And as they walked inside hand in hand, Jake knew they would build a new kind of family together, born from wild dreams and hard-fought battles. Each day would breathe life into their journey, carving out a space where hope could thrive. Maggie's laughter rang through the barn, echoing against the walls, filling the void of loneliness with a light so fierce it could carry them both into a brighter tomorrow. Jake Thompson wiped his brow as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the vast stretch of Double J Ranch in hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the sweet scent of hay and the low hum of crickets. It had been a long day of wrangling cattle, but a satisfying one. He felt the familiar weariness settle in his bones as he stepped into the barn to gather some tools before heading home, but something stopped him cold. A faint sound, a soft whimper, drifted through the wooden beams. He paused, straining to hear, his heart racing. In a world that could be so cruel, he had learned to trust his instincts. The whimper came again, more urgent this time, sending a chill down his spine. "Hello," he called, his voice steady but filled with unease. The barn, usually his sanctuary, suddenly felt heavy and dark. Walking deeper into the shadows, Jake scanned the dim corners, each creak of the wood under his boots echoing in the silence. Then he saw her, a small figure huddled among a stack of hay, her thin frame barely visible beneath a tattered blanket. She looked no older than 6 or 7, and the sight of her brought a pit into his stomach. "Hey there," he said softly, kneeling down, trying to appear non-threatening. The girl stirred, gripped by a fear that seemed to cling like smoke. She blinked slowly, her large brown eyes brimming with confusion and something deeper, a kind of sorrow that inked her features in a way Jake had never seen before. "I'm hungry," she whispered, a small voice filled with despair. Jake's heart dropped. It wasn't just hunger in her voice, it was hunger for safety, for care, a kind of hunger that transcended the physical. "Come here," he said, his voice a comforting thread in the dark. He reached out his hand. Slowly she crawled toward him, skepticism painted on her tiny face. She was like a wild animal, unsure if she could trust this giant of a man who had found her in the shadows. Jake felt a wave of fierce protectiveness surge through him. Once she was close enough, he noticed the dirt caked on her cheeks and the bruises that marred her arms. He asked, hoping to coax something from her. "Maggie," she finally replied, the name a fragile whisper that seemed to float in the air like a distant memory. "Well, Maggie, I'm Jake." He stood and gently took her hand, feeling the shiver that passed through her as they stepped into the light. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Jake's mind raced. Who was this little girl? How had she ended up here, alone and scared? His heart ached at the thought of her being lost, abandoned. His own childhood hadn't been easy, but it was a far cry from what she must have faced. Inside the farmhouse, he hurried to the kitchen, the familiar scent of fried potatoes and fresh bread filling the air. He rummaged through cabinets, pulling out anything he could find: eggs, milk, and a loaf of bread. "I'll make you a feast," he declared, trying to keep the mood light. Maggie stood shyly in the doorway, her eyes darting around, taking in her surroundings as if she were afraid it could all disappear. Jake busied himself at the stove, glancing back at her now and then. The way she held herself, so small and tense, broke his heart anew. He asked, trying to ignite a flicker of joy. Her cheeks brightened slightly at the mention of food, and she nodded almost shyly. Soon, the intoxicating aroma filled the kitchen, and he plated a stack of warm, fluffy pancakes, drizzled with syrup. Jake placed a colorful bowl of fruits beside her along with a tall glass of milk. "Here you go," he said, setting the table for two. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at the food. It was as if she feared that this moment, so generous and kind, was too good to be true. "It's okay," he reassured her. "It's safe." When she took that first bite, he couldn't help but smile. The way her eyes widened, lighting up as she savored the sweetness, felt like watching the dawn break after the longest night. He finally asked, the words sliding into the space between them like two ships passing in the night. She paused, her fork hovering over her plate. "I ran away," she admitted, her voice trembling. Looking down, she fiddled with her sleeves, torn at the edges. "I had to." His stomach twisted with concern. "Not safe," she chewed her lip, grappling with thoughts behind those big, sorrowful eyes. "My dad, he would get angry, real angry. One time Jake's heart broke. Anger bubbled in his chest, the injustice of it frightening and overwhelming. "You don't have to go back," he said firmly. She looked at him, hope flickering in her gaze. Maggie whispered, her voice trembling as if fear might rattle her apart. "I promise," he replied, a fierce conviction igniting within him. "You can stay here as long as you need." Night fell softly over the ranch, and as they finished their meal, a quiet calm settled in. They talked about the cows, the horses, and the stars that twinkled above them. In that moment, Jake felt a connection growing between them, a bond built on shared stories and the promise of safety. Days turned into weeks. The barn transformed, colors brightened, and laughter filled the air. With each sunset they shared, the weight of Maggie's past started to lift, replaced by the warmth of new memories. Jake helped her find joy in the simplest things, the way the sunlight danced through the barn doors, or how the horses neighed softly in greeting. She learned to care for the animals, her touch tentative but loving. Slowly she began to reclaim her childhood, each day stitching her back together like a quilt patched with care. But shadows still loomed, lingering just outside the safety of the ranch. The fear in her eyes would resurface at odd moments. The sound of a truck rumbling by or a sudden crash from outside would send her flinching, her small body seizing as she braced for something terrible. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight fade beyond the hills, Jake turned to her. "You're stronger than you know, Maggie." Her expression twisted as the shadows threatened to close in again. She asked, her voice small and vulnerable. "No," he said firmly, "but we need help." Maggie's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was a moment of intense clarity, a toxic swirl of fear and anguish. "There are people who can help us," Jake soothed, brushing a gentle hand against her back. She nodded, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. Could she let others in? Was it safe? Maggie's bravery surprised even herself. With Jake's unwavering support, they reached out to a local charity specializing in helping abused children. A social worker came to visit, her kind demeanor calming the air between them. "You're doing the right thing, Maggie," she said, giving the girl a warm smile. The social worker listened intently, validating Maggie's experiences, holding space for her to express the words she had kept bottled inside. Each story she shared peeled back the layers of pain, revealing threads of strength and resilience woven deep within her being. Days turned into weeks once more, as the routine of ranch life melded with the newfound reality they both had to navigate. There were visits, meetings, and paperwork stacked high like the hay bales in the barn. Yet, through it all, Jake remained steadfast by Maggie's side, a silent guardian against the world. But the day came when Maggie had to take the stand before a judge. Jake felt his heart race, a mix of pride and fear encasing him. He watched as Maggie walked into that courtroom, her small frame so brave against an overwhelming backdrop. When the judge called her name, Maggie stepped forward, and in that moment Jake understood the gravity of what lay before them. As she looked out at the room filled with strangers, he saw her small hands tremble. With a gentle nod from her social worker, Maggie began to speak, her voice breaking the silence like a clear bell. She shared her journey, her truth pouring out like sunlight illuminating even the darkest corners of their fears. No longer just a small girl lost in a barn, she transformed into a force, reclaiming her narrative one word at a time. Jake watched, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. He knew then that her journey would not be defined by her past, but forged by her courage and the promise of a new tomorrow. As the gavel fell, time seemed to stretch, and he held his breath, waiting for the decision that would change everything. "Custody is awarded to Jacob Thompson," the judge declared, the words landing like a balm on Jake's soul. The rush of emotion swelled within him as Maggie turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. He rushed forward, enveloping her in a protective embrace, and as she melted into him, the years of fear began to dissolve. Back at the ranch, the air was thick with possibility. The stars twinkled above them like old friends returning home, and for the first time in a long while, there was laughter, not burdened laughter, but a pure sound of joy. Jake and Maggie danced beneath the heavens, their silhouettes blending into the night. Each twirl, each laugh, stitched another layer of closeness between them, replacing grief with light, fear with love. In that moment, they weren't just a rancher and a girl. They were family, bound not by blood, but by brave choices and the powerful testament of love. Together, they would weave a new story, one filled with warmth, hope, and an unbreakable bond that would carry them through the storms of life. The sun was setting over the plains, casting long shadows across the fields of Double J Ranch. Jake Thompson had just finished a long day of work, wiping the sweat from his brow as a gentle breeze rustled through the tall grass. He sighed contentedly, feeling a sense of accomplishment as he headed toward the barn to wrap things up for the night. But something caught his attention, a sound, faint but unmistakable. A soft whimper echoed from inside the barn. Jake froze, his heart quickening. He had always felt a strange connection to that place, but today it felt different, heavier. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The air felt charged like the calm before a storm. Gathering his courage, Jake stepped into the shadowy expanse of the barn, his boots crunching on the hay-covered ground. The familiar scent of livestock lingered, but now it was mixed with something he couldn't quite put his finger on, a hint of fear. As he inched further inside, his eyes adjusted to the gloom. There, nestled among the bales of hay, was a small figure. His breath caught in his throat as he realized it was a girl, no more than 8 years old, curled up and shivering. Her hair was a wild tangle and her clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, the fabric torn and dirty. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and soothing. She stirred, blinking slowly, confusion swirling in her big brown eyes. As Jake moved closer, fear flashed across her face and she pressed herself deeper into the hay. "It's all right," he murmured, crouching down to her level. "I won't hurt you." The girl hesitated, and for a moment Jake held his breath. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Jake felt an ache spread through him. "Come on," he encouraged gently, extending his hand. She studied him, distrust flickering in her eyes, but when she looked at his outstretched hand, something shifted. Slowly, she reached out, her tiny fingers brushing against his palm. Jake led her outside, the golden light of dusk spilling over them as they stepped into the warmth of the evening. He asked, his heart flooding with concern. "Maggie," she replied, her voice timid yet resilient. "Well, Maggie, I'm Jake. You're safe here." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Jake couldn't shake the urgency in his chest. Who was this girl? How had she ended up here? Each question only deepened the ache in his heart. Once inside, he guided her to the kitchen, filled with the comforting smells of home. He quickly scrambled eggs and toasted bread, pouring a glass of milk that looked almost too big for her. As he cooked, he glanced back at Maggie, sitting at the table with a hunched posture, her eyes darting around the room. He asked, trying to smile. She nodded slowly, but the wariness still lingered in her gaze. Jake placed the food in front of her and watched as she hesitated, then picked up the fork with shaking hands. But when she took that first bite, something changed, the way her eyes widened, the tentative smile creeping across her face. It felt like a light cutting through the fog. After a few more bites, her demeanor shifted. She asked between mouthfuls. His heart lifted. "Two out in the barn," he replied, excited to draw her in. "One's named Rusty and the other is Luna." Maggie finished her meal, the plate empty now, and for the first time Jake saw her relax. He sensed a flicker of hope igniting within her. He ventured, his curiosity getting the better of him. She stiffened, her expression fading into shadow. I ran away," she whispered, her voice quivering. Jake felt a wave of anger wash over him. "What do you mean it wasn't safe?" Tears welled in her eyes as she hesitated, searching for the right words. "My dad, he would get angry, really angry." She trailed off, shrouded in fear. Jake's heart ached for her. "You don't have to go back, you're safe here," he said firmly, but he could see the skepticism still etched on her face. The night unfolded gently as they sat together, sharing stories under the soft glow of the kitchen light. Slowly, Maggie began to open up, recounting fragmented memories of her life before. The tales were dark, filled with shadows that clung to her words. Yet in between the cracks, a flicker of resilience sparked anew. As the weeks passed, Jake transformed the barn into a haven for her. He brought in warm blankets, old quilts, and plenty of pillows. Every corner was filled with toys and books he'd found in town, little treasures to spark joy in the girl who had endured so much. Maggie thrived under the love and care she found at the ranch. She laughed more, began to help Jake with chores, and even took to the horses with a brave heart. Rusty nuzzled her, his gentle spirit creating a bond that only seemed to strengthen as days went on. But even amid the blooming sense of safety, shadows lingered. The girl still flinched at loud noises, sometimes freezing at sudden movements as if taken back to a past she couldn't escape. Jake kept a close watch, his heart breaking for the silent battles she fought. He wanted to protect her from everything, even her memories. One quiet evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson, Jake found Maggie sitting on a hay bale, staring into the horizon as if it held all the answers. He sat beside her, the silence comforting. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought sent a shiver through Jake. "We'll figure it out together," he said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you." But that night brought more than just uneasy thoughts. Early the next morning, as dawn broke, Jake felt a sense of urgency, the kind that sends shivers down your spine. He could sense something wasn't right. As he stepped outside, something caught his eye. A truck was parked at the end of the dirt road, dust swirling in its wake. Panic gripped him. The vehicle radiated a sense of danger and familiarity. He turned and sprinted back to the barn, desperate to shield Maggie from whatever threat loomed. He called, his voice sharp with urgency. Her eyes widened, fear flooding her small face. "Just trust me," he urged, his heart hammering in his chest. He led her to a small, concealed space behind the hay bales, and they crouched low together, silence stretching thick around them. Jake's mind raced through the possibilities, visions of Maggie's father, a man he'd never met but who bore the weight of threatening shadows. He could hear the truck's engine rumble to life, and instinct urged him to guard her fiercely. Moments felt like lifetimes, and he held his breath, straining to listen. Jake peered through a gap, anxiety clawing at him. The driver emerged, a tall figure with an intimidating air, scanning the property with sharp eyes, lingering too long on the barn. Maggie whimpered beside him, gripping his arm like a lifeline. "Stay quiet," he whispered fiercely, willing his heart to slow. But then the man moved toward the barn, purpose etched in his every step. Jake knew in that moment he had to act. "Stay here," he instructed Maggie urgently, crawling out as quietly as possible. He stepped into the light, every nerve in his body electrified, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He called, his voice steadying as he approached the man. The stranger turned, a sneer curling on his lips. Jake met his gaze, refusing to back down. "Maggie." The man stepped forward, fury evident in his posture. Jake's heart raced. "She's safe here." A dangerous energy crackled in the air, a tangible tension as they sized each other up. The man took another step closer, and Jake's instincts kicked into overdrive. I suggest you leave before things get ugly, Jake warned, fists clenched, ready to defend the girl behind him. Anne laughed, a low and grating sound. You really think you can protect her? At that moment, Maggie's small voice broke through the tension. No, the man's attention snapped to her, and in that instant, Jake felt a surge of strength. He shouted, stepping protectively in front of Maggie. The standoff felt like an eternity, but finally the man hesitated, his bravado faltering. This isn't over, he growled, turning on his heel and storming back to his truck. Jake watched, his heart still pounding. Once the dust settled behind the vehicle, he raced back to Maggie, who had tears streaming down her cheeks. He pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her trembling against him. You're safe. That night, inside the quiet of the barn, Jake held Maggie close, reassuring her with every promise he could muster. They spoke softly, the shadows dissipating as they filled the air with hope. Yet deep in the recesses of their hearts, they both understood that danger could always return. Every day became a battle enforcing security measures around the property, keeping the doors locked and listening for any signs of trouble. But amid the fear, something extraordinary began to flourish. The bond between Jake and Maggie transformed from a fragile connection into an unwavering partnership built on trust and love. As the weeks turned into months, Jake learned to recognize the moments of fear that still flickered in Maggie's eyes and how to soothe them. They spent evenings under the stars, laughing and sharing stories, all the while building a future forged in resilience. Then came the day when the social worker returned, a familiar face filled with warmth and understanding. She asked, glancing between them. Maggie smiled, and Jake felt a burst of pride in her transformation. He never expected to witness a child bloom from fear into the joyous girl before him. We're good, Maggie replied, her voice bright with sincerity. Jake's heart soared. She's family, he added, smiling. The social worker nodded, her eyes shining with approval. I'm so glad to hear it. As they spoke, a sense of peace enveloped them. Though the shadows of the past still lingered at the edges of their lives, the future looked brighter. Maggie finally felt the weight of her trauma begin to lift. She laughed more, allowed her spirit to soar, and worried less about what lay beyond the ranch. Jake could see it in the way she chased after the horses, the way she danced in the fields. She was finally reclaiming her childhood. But Jake knew they could never forget the dangers that loomed. He remained vigilant, a protective spirit guiding them through the uncertainties, a watchful eye on their horizon. One evening, as the sun sank into the horizon in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Maggie approached him, her expression contemplative. She asked, her voice low but steady. He knelt down, meeting her gaze. I don't know, Maggie, but if he does, we'll be ready. Tears brimmed in her eyes, and she threw her arms around him. Jake held her tight, fighting back his own tears. Thank you for letting me be your family, he whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and gratitude. A few days later, while out in the fields, Jake spotted a figure in the distance, a silhouette he recognized all too well. His heart sank. The truck was back, and this time it was parked a little closer. He yelled, rushing over to her, heart racing against the fear that consumed him. Her eyes widened with fear, and she immediately understood. There's someone here. As they sprinted towards the barn, Jake's mind raced, piecing together a plan even as dread set in. He could sense the figure approaching. There was no room for hesitation. They needed to be prepared together. Inside the barn, Jake locked the doors tightly, his heart thundering in his chest. He knelt beside Maggie, who was visibly shaking. You're safe, I promise, he whispered fiercely. She asked, tears welling in her eyes. No, he said, the confidence in his voice stronger than he felt. Maggie nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. The shadows closing and felt nefarious, but they were no longer alone. Together, they could face whatever came next. Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him, gathering the courage from deep within himself. It was time to confront the darkness, to stand and protect the light they had nurtured together. As the figure in the distance advanced, Jake steeled himself. I'm ready, he said, feeling Maggie's small hand squeeze his. Together, they took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever was waiting outside, ready to stand as one against the shadows, because they were family now, united against the storm, stronger together. The sun dipped low behind the rugged hills, casting long shadows across the Double J Ranch. Jake Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow as he prepared to call it a day. The rhythmic clanging of his boots echoed in the barn, a comforting sound that had always been a part of his life. But today, something felt off. A faint sound reached his ears, a soft whimper that broke through the tranquility of the evening. Jake paused, his heart quickening. He was no stranger to the joys and sorrows of ranch life, but this sound was different, raw and unguarded, like a bird caught in a storm. He called out, his voice steady yet laced with concern. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. He felt a pull deep in his gut, coaxing him forward. As he stepped into the darker corners of the barn, he noticed something, or rather, someone huddled between bales of hay. Kneeling down, he narrowed his eyes, and in that moment the world around him faded. There, curled into a tight ball, was a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old. Her hair was a tangled mess, her cheeks sunken and gray, and her clothes were little more than rags hanging on her frail body. She was still, the rhythmic rise and fall of her breath almost imperceptible. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, wanting to reach out but unsure how to approach her without frightening her further. The girl stirred, her dark eyes flicking open. Fear flashed across her face, and she pulled deeper into the hay. "Please don't hurt me," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Jake felt an ache in his chest. "I won't hurt you," he promised, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "I just want to help." "Maggie," she said, her voice trembling as she finally met his gaze. "Maggie," he echoed, savoring the name as it danced on his tongue. "You're safe here, I promise. Can you come with me?" Her eyes darted around, filled with suspicion but perhaps a glimmer of hope. Slowly she reached out her small hand, and as Jake took it, he felt a surge of determination flow through him. He led her out of the barn, sunlight spilling over them like a warm blanket, an unfamiliar sight for the little girl who had seen only darkness. He asked gently, trying to piece together her story as they made their way toward the farmhouse. She hesitated, fear tainting her expression. "I ran away," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My dad," he got angry. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, each syllable a note in a tragic symphony. Jake's heart sank as he listened, imagining the kind of life that would send a child running. "Well, you don't have to worry anymore," he said reassuringly. Once inside, Jake rushed to the kitchen, filling a plate with whatever he could find. Scrambled eggs, toast, and a generous glass of milk. He placed the food in front of her, and for a moment they both marveled at the way Maggie looked at the meal, with wide, hungry eyes. "Eat up," Jake encouraged, his heart swelling as she dove into the food. Each bite felt like a tiny revolution, pulling her from the depths of despair. When Maggie finished and finally looked up at him, a tentative smile crept across her face, and Jake felt the first cracks of warmth break through the ice of their circumstance. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but filled with sincerity. "You're welcome," he replied, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. But as she pushed the plate away, the jokester in him couldn't resist. "We might have more if you eat the leftovers," he teased with a wink. The laughter that erupted from her surprised both of them, a beautiful sound that danced through the air like music. "Maybe later," she said, grinning back. As the daylight slipped into dusk, Maggie began to relax. She followed him around the farmhouse, her curiosity piquing as they explored. Together, they wandered into the barn, where the warm scent of hay and animals filled the humid air. She asked, her eyes wide as she spotted a gentle horse swishing its tail. "Of course. This here's Rusty," he explained, leading her toward the horse. With each stroke, Maggie's laughter faded into the smooth rhythm of comfort, a melody that Jake could feel resonate in his own heart. He hadn't realized how much he craved this connection, this shared moment of joy. But as nighttime settled in, Jake knew that darkness was not just a blanket of stars above. He sensed that shadows loomed just beyond their newfound safety. "Maggie," he said, his tone turning serious as they sat on the barn floor surrounded by hay bales. Her expression shifted, unease settling over her like a fog. I don't know, I had to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. He asked gently, hoping to coax her out of the dark file of memories. "I don't want to," she said, her eyes glistening. "I understand," Jake replied softly, wishing he could take away the pain that lived behind those innocent, frightened eyes. but you don't have to feel alone anymore." In that moment, Maggie looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope, the kind of hopeful spark that felt so fragile yet so dangerous. Could she trust him? Did she dare to believe that things could be different? Over the next few weeks, Maggie found her rhythm on the ranch. She helped Jake with chores, and together they created a routine that began to replace her fears with laughter. They shared meals, took care of the animals, and even planted a small garden out back. As time went on, Maggie became part of the landscape itself, a bright spark amid the wilderness, a living testament to hope. The shadows that once clung to her slowly receded, replaced by the warmth of acceptance and love. But late one night, as the moon hung low in the sky, she woke up screaming, "No." Her body was tangled in the sheets as nightmares clawed their way back to the surface. Jake rushed into her room, the familiar pang of fear piercing his heart. "Maggie," he knelt by her bed, feeling utterly helpless. She flung herself into his arms, sobbing against his chest. "He's coming back." Jake held her tightly, murmuring soothing words, wishing he could erase the memories that haunted her. "You're safe, Maggie. I'll protect you from him." Days turned to weeks, and as the seasons began to shift, the bond between Jake and Maggie solidified into something unbreakable. She understood his routines, and he learned the swells of her emotions. Together, they faced the world, until Jake found himself staring down the very thing he had feared all along. It started simply enough. A knock at the door one afternoon. The sun was high, the air thick with summer heat as Jake opened it to find a man standing there. His muscular frame and set jaw felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. The man demanded. Jake's heart raced, self-preservation surging through him. He asked, his voice steady but filled with tension. "Maggie is my daughter," the man replied, his tone sharp. Panic flared in Jake's chest as he looked over his shoulder toward the sound of Maggie's laughter in the barn. "You can't take her." The man growled, stepping onto the porch as though challenging Jake to move aside. Jake felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce that it drowned out all fear. "She's been through enough," he said firmly, standing tall. The man's eyes darkened and he squared his shoulders. "You think this is a game?" Just then, Maggie appeared at the door, curiosity etched across her face. She asked, her brow furrowed. "Maggie," Jake said, keeping his eyes on the man, "you don't have to worry." "Maggie, come here," her father called, a sinister sweetness coating his words. Maggie hesitated, fear evident in her gaze as she glanced between them. "No." The man's expression twisted into anger. He took a step toward her, but Jake quickly moved in front of Maggie, shielding her with his body. "You will not lay a finger on her," he said, the power of his protective instinct surging through him. "Stay out of this, rancher," the man hissed, but Jake remained unyielding, the fire of determination burning bright. "Maggie, listen to me," he said, turning slowly to face her. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she shook her head vigorously. "I want to stay." The man's face morphed into a mask of rage. He shouted, but Maggie stood firm behind Jake. In that moment, Jake felt time freeze around them, a snapshot of brutality he had never prepared for. The thought of losing her, of letting fear rip apart the fragile family they had created, burned through him like wildfire. "I will call the police," Jake said evenly, pulling out his phone, never breaking eye contact with the man. "You'll regret this, rancher," the man spat, his expression tightly coiled like a snake ready to strike. The weight of the confrontation hung in the air, thick as fog, until the sound of sirens broke the tension, slicing through the momentary stillness. With defiance etched across Jake's face, the man stepped back, fury etched in his features. "This isn't over," he sneered, sprinting back to his truck and speeding off down the dirt road. As the noise dissipated, Jake turned to Maggie, who looked pale and shaken. "You did amazing, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. She whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," he replied softly, holding her firmly, "but you deserve to feel safe." One call from the rancher swiftly brought local authorities to the scene. Jake explained the situation, tension still simmering beneath the surface. When they took Maggie's statement, he was reminded of the strength that had blossomed in her. In the weeks that followed, they worked together to fortify their lives against the ghosts of the past. It wasn't easy. The fear still lurked in the corners. Yet with each passing day, they faced that fear together. Maggie grew stronger, The shadows of her trauma pushed back as she began to open up about her experiences. She shared more stories, not just of pain, but also of dreams now taking root again, the kind of dreams a little girl should always hold on to. Together, Jake and Maggie created a safe haven, anchored in love and determination. It wasn't just about surviving the storm, it was about finding joy amid the turmoil. And as the seasons changed, so did they. They tackled fears side by side, transforming uncertainty into resilience. The ranch was not just a backdrop, it became a living entity, a testament to the power of compassion, the miracle of tenacity, and the undeniable strength of family forged in the most unexpected of circumstances. One evening, they stood together, arms wrapped around each other as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with colors they had both come to cherish. "Maggie," Jake said, glancing down at her with a smile, "you're not just my responsibility anymore, you're family." She beamed up at him, eyes shining with hope. "I know, Jake." As the stars emerged one by one in the indigo sky, they stood hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever the future held together, unbreakable, love binding them against any storm. Jake Thompson took a deep breath as he stepped into the barn, the familiar scent of hay and leather wrapping around him like an old friend. He was a rancher through and through, the kind of man who understood the rhythms of nature, balancing work with the simple pleasures of watching the sun rise and set over the vast open fields. But today, as he scanned the once busy barn, a rush of anxiety swept over him. It was nearly sundown and something felt off. He paused, listening intently. Then he heard it, a soft whimper, a sound so fragile it could have easily been drowned out by the wind. His heart raced, curiosity gripping him like a vice. Jake called out, his voice steady but edged with uncertainty. He moved deeper into the barn, his steps careful and deliberate. The whimper came again, clearer this time. He followed the sound around stacks of hay bales, pulling them apart until he discovered a small figure curled up tightly in the corner. At first glance, Jake's heart sank. It was a girl no older than 6 or 7, tucked away as if she could vanish into the shadows. Her clothes were torn and her skin appeared pale and fragile like a flower wilting in the sun. She looked up at him, eyes wide with fear, and Jake felt a swell of protectiveness wash over him. "Hey there," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Maggie," he repeated, the name settling in his heart like a promise. "Can I help you?" She blinked at him, her expression wary. His chest tightened at her words. He could almost feel the weight of her hunger pressing down on him like the dark clouds that sometimes loomed over the ranch. "Okay, Maggie, let's get you something to eat." With uncertain glances, she took his hand. As he led her out of the barn and into the fading light of day, something shifted inside him. The gleaming sunlight cascaded over the ranch, but all he could think about was the shadowed corners of the girl's life. Inside the farmhouse, the warmth enveloped them as Jake quickly prepared a plate of food. The kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and eggs, and he could see Maggie's eyes widen as she took in the sight of the meal before her. "Go ahead," he urged, placing the food in front of her. As she dove into the plate, Jake couldn't help but watch her with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. The way she devoured the food, like someone who hadn't seen a real meal in days, pierced his heart. It was more than just hunger, it was desperation. He asked gently, hoping to understand what had brought her to his barn. She hesitated, her fork pausing midair, fear creeping back into her eyes. I ran away," she whispered. Jake pressed, his gut tightening as the pieces of her story began to shift in his mind. Dad got angry," she stammered, her voice barely audible as tears began to fill her eyes. "He hurt me." The revelation hit Jake like a blow to the chest. He felt a fire igniting within him, an urge to protect this fragile girl at all costs. "You don't have to go back, Maggie. You're safe here with me," he said, the words spilling from him like a vow. When she looked at him, the flicker of hope in her eyes was something he dared to hold onto. She finished her meal, and for the first time she smiled, a hesitant, grateful smile that melted the fear surrounding them both. As evening settled over the ranch, the shadows lengthened and filled the room with their darkness. They sat together, the warmth of the shared meal creating a bubble of safety. But Jake knew that the battle wasn't just for Maggie's stomach, it was a fight for her heart and mind as well. Jake showed Maggie to the small room he had prepared for her. It was simple: a bed, a soft blanket, and a few books he had collected over the years. "This will be your space," he told her, watching as she stepped inside, taking in her new surroundings. "It's nice," she said, her voice small but filled with wonder. "I thought you might like it." "You can sleep here and I'll make breakfast in the morning," he assured her. Although she nodded, her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Jake felt the weight of her fear. "If he comes back, I'll protect you. I promise." Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Maggie began to blossom. She helped Jake with chores around the ranch, her laughter ringing out like a melody in the open spaces. She learned to care for the horses, and he watched in awe as she transformed into a spirited soul who could light up the darkest corners of his world. But even in moments of joy, the specter of fear loomed large. There were days when she would flinch at loud noises or freeze at sudden movements. On those days, Jake would hold her close, whispering reassurances until her heart would calm, until she could breathe again. One quiet afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, the sun casting warm rays on their faces, she spoke up. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the gravity behind her question. "Maggie, you have to know this. Whatever happens, I will always protect you," he said firmly, locking his gaze with hers. A contented sigh escaped her lips, a sound that echoed between them like a promise forged in trust. They spent hours talking, weaving stories and dreams as they watched the golden fields sway. Then one day, everything changed. Jake was out in the yard, adjusting the fence, when he caught sight of a shadow lurking near the barn. A vehicle, dusty and familiar, pulled up on the long dirt road leading to his home. His stomach twisted as he recognized the truck, a jarring reminder of the darkness that had haunted Maggie. He shouted, panic racing through him. He sprinted toward the barn, heart pounding like a drum. When he reached the entrance, Maggie was already standing there, wide-eyed and fearful. She asked, sensing the shift in the air. "It's him," Jake said, urgency lacing his voice. He led her around a stack of hay bales, their eyes glued to the door. The man climbed out of the truck, his gait filled with purpose. The sun's rays highlighted the tension in his shoulders as he approached the barn, and Jake's protective instincts surged. "He's looking for you," Jake said, whispering fiercely. They huddled in the shadows, Jake's heart racing as he peered out to see the man searching through the barn, moving with an unsettling confidence. It was clear this man believed he had the right to take Maggie back. He called out, his voice grating and toxic. "I just want to talk." But Jake knew better. This was not a conversation, it was a threat. Fear coursed through him. How was he going to protect her? How far would this man go to reclaim what he believed was his? He could sense Maggie trembling beside him, her small body vibrating with uncertainty. Then, without thinking, Jake stepped out from behind the hay bales, a primal instinct kicking in, fueling the strength in his voice. He shouted, trying to keep his own fear from spilling over into his words. The man wheeled around, surprise flashing across his face before it morphed into anger. "You think you can keep her from me?" "She's not safe with you," Jake replied firmly, every word an arrow aimed at the heart of the man's arrogance. "Stay out of this, rancher," the man growled, inching closer. Jake felt a surge of coldness wash over him. "Home? You think you can call that a home? Stop!" Maggie's voice broke through, shaky and desperate. She stepped forward, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to go back." Jake's heart pounded as he placed himself in front of her again, ready to shield her with his body. The man took a step closer, fists clenched and face twisted in rage. "You hurt her," Jake said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. In that instante, the wind swirled outside, and Jake felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sense of impending conflict. Something dark coalesced in the air as the standoff stretched on. Jake barked, his voice approaching a roar. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, time stood still as the intensity hung between them like static electricity. Then suddenly, the man turned away, snarling in frustration as he stomped toward his truck. "Mark my words, this isn't over," he yelled back, driving off in a cloud of dust. Jake watched until the vehicle disappeared down the road, feeling the tension in his shoulders dissolve. When he turned back to Maggie, she was trembling, fear etched across her small face. He rushed to her side, gathering her in his arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay, it's over." he reassured her, feeling her warmth seep into his skin. She whispered, her voice shaking. "I won't let that happen. We'll figure this thing out together," Jake said firmly, feeling every ounce of his love for her surge through him. As he held her close, he could feel her body slowly relax against him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. In the aftermath, Jake took swift action. He reached out to local authorities, seeking advice and asking for legal protection for Maggie. They helped him file paperwork, documents that would keep her safely at the ranch away from her father. Over time, Maggie began to feel a sense of stability emerging from the chaos, and they settled into a routine that felt like home, full of laughter, chores, and tender moments of connection. One day, Jake found Maggie sitting outside, drawing in the dirt with a stick. He crouched down beside her, watching as she concentrated. He asked, drawing closer. "A house," she said, her eyes sparkling. "It looks beautiful," he said, beaming with pride. She glanced up, a smile breaking across her face. "Absolutely," Jake replied. She asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Yes, even tomatoes," he replied, laughing. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, woven together by threads of laughter and trust. Yet beneath the surface, the darkness still lingered. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world around them felt alive, the smell of fresh earth, the sounds of nature thrumming in harmony. Just then, Jake noticed Maggie looking pensive. He asked gently. She began, eyebrows furrowed. "What if he finds a way to take me back?" Jake took a deep breath, feeling the heaviness rise within him. "Maggie, listen to me. I will fight for you." Her eyes glistened, and Jake felt a surge of protective instinct rise through him. "You are strong and you are safe." That night, as they settled in for bed, Maggie looked more at peace than he had ever seen her. But the next morning, the serenity shattered. Jake was outside tending to the horses when he spotted a figure approaching from a distance. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but as the figure drew closer, his stomach dropped. It was him. The man was back, anger etched across his face as he stomped toward the barn. Panic surged through Jake as he sprinted toward the house. He shouted, urgency lacing his voice. "Get inside." She raced toward him, confusion clouding her features, but Jake could see the fear welling up in her eyes. He urged as they hurried together. They dashed inside, and Jake slammed the door behind them, heart pounding. He could hear the man's footsteps outside, a predator approaching his prey. Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Jake held her close, feeling both panic and determination swell within him. "We're going to call for help," he said, grabbing his phone while guiding her to the back of the house. "Maggie, just stick with me," he said as he dialed the authorities, trying to keep his voice from betraying his fear. He fought to calm his racing heart as he explained the situation. Each second felt like an eternity as they hurriedly formulated a plan, telling them they needed immediate assistance. Just then, the man pounded on the door, his voice a guttural roar. "Let me in." Jake felt Maggie's body tense beside him. "He's not just here to talk, Maggie," he said, his voice steady as he gripped her hand. The man continued to shout, beating on the door with rage, and Jake could feel the walls of their sanctuary trembling. "Maggie, listen to me," he said, kneeling down so he could look into her eyes. "I need you to trust me." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she nodded, determination lighting her small face. As the chaos outside intensified, Jake felt a wave of fear crash over him, but he clung to the hope that had carried them both this far. They waited, hearts pounding in unison, breaths held, until the sound of sirens broke through the storm. The pounding on the door stopped, and Jake rushed to the window as the law enforcement vehicle pulled up. Relief flooded through him, the weight lifting slightly off his shoulders. The officers approached the door, and Jake swung it open, stepping aside to allow them inside. "He's out there," Jake said, pointing toward the direction of the truck. The officers quickly moved toward the door, ready to confront the man outside. When they stepped outside, Jake turned to Maggie, kneeling beside her. "You did amazing," he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. Minutes felt like hours as tension filled the air, their fates hanging in the balance. Crowds began to gather from the community, neighbors hearing the commotion and looking on, holding their breath as the confrontation unfolded. Then the man was brought inside, cuffed and visibly enraged, the fire in his eyes reflecting the chaos inside him. He spat, directing his fury at Jake. "She deserves a life free from fear," Jake replied, standing tall as a shield for Maggie, who clutched his hand tightly. With the officers ensuring the situation was under control, Jake watched as Maggie slowly began to breathe again. With every passing moment in the chaos, Jake found himself bolstered by a deeper sense of purpose. The fight wasn't just physical, it was also emotional, and together they would face it all. After everything settled, Jake crouched down beside Maggie, who had let the tears flow freely now that safety enveloped her once more. "See, you're stronger than you think." That night, as they huddled close in her room, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. He said softly, brushing a hand through her hair, "We're a team now." Maggie sniffled and managed a smile, her eyes glimmering with gratitude and love. "Yeah, a team," she echoed, warmth spreading between them like a promise. In the surrender of their vulnerability, they found strength. Together, they would forge a new path, bound by hope and resilience. Over the next several months, Jake and Maggie transformed their lives at the ranch. They planted flowers and vegetables in the garden, built a treehouse together, and shared laughter that filled the air with joy. The ranch bloomed with love and light, echoing a new beginning for both of them. And as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above, Jake realized something profound. They had faced their demons, weathered storms, and emerged stronger on the other side. The darkness that had once threatened them paled in comparison to the depth of their bond. They had built a family, one that was fierce, loving, and united. With Maggie beside him, Jake knew they were unstoppable. Together, they had turned a tragic past into a beautiful future filled with love and hope, a journey that taught them both the power of resilience and the profound strength found in connection. The sun dipped low over the horizon, draping the Double J Ranch in golden light. Jake Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling the weight of a long day settling into his bones. He loved this land, the rolling hills, the soft rustle of grass in the breeze, but today, something felt different. As he made his way toward the barn, a strange sense of unease washed over him. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of hay and leather greeted him, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else, a faint whimper. Jake froze, straining to hear again. There it was, a soft sound, almost like the cry of a lost animal, but there was something human about it. He called out, his voice steady yet filled with concern. Silence enveloped the barn like a heavy fog. With cautious steps, he moved deeper between the hay bales and old farm equipment, each creak echoing off the wooden walls. That's when he saw her, a small figure curled up in a corner, her thin body almost disappearing among the shadows. Jake's heart raced as he drew closer. It was a girl, no older than 6 or 7, her clothes ragged and dirty, her skin pale and bruised. She looked up at him, fear etched across her tiny face. "Hey there," Jake said softly, kneeling down, lowering his voice to something soothing. She blinked at him, the wild look in her eyes a mix of fear and confusion. "Maggie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maggie," he repeated, feeling an ache blossom inside him. "You're safe here, I promise." She hesitated, the walls built around her heart so thick it seemed an impossible task to break through. But then she nodded slightly, her hand reaching out hesitantly to accept his. As he guided her out of the barn and into the evening light, a wave of protectiveness surged within him. What kind of life had brought her here? Who had hurt her? Her gaze dropped, her face turning into a mask of sadness. "I ran away," she murmured, gripping his hand tighter. Alarm bells rang in Jake's mind. What horrors lay in the corners of her past? "You don't have to worry. You're safe now," he reassured her, leading her toward the farmhouse. Inside, the warm light spilled over them, and he quickly prepared a plate of food. Eggs, bacon, and a glass of milk sat waiting for the girl who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He placed the plate in front of her, watching as her eyes widened, filled with disbelief. "Go ahead," he urged. The moment she picked up that fork, Jake couldn't look away. Each bite she took was a small victory, a moment of hope breaking free. As she ate, he noticed the way her small frame began to relax, shoulders easing, tension fading. For the first time in what felt like forever, she looked almost happy. After she devoured every last morsel, Jake leaned in. "Maggie, what happened to you?" Her smile faltered. "Dad got angry," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jake felt the color drain from his face, anger bubbling within him for the man who had caused her so much pain. "You're not going back to him, Maggie." As the night fell, Jake led her to a small room he had prepared, a simple space filled with a bed and a few toys he had kept from when he was a kid. "This will be your room," he said, watching her eyes dart around with trepidation. She asked, her voice uncertain. "Of course," he replied firmly. But as the days turned to weeks, Jake noticed that the shadows of her past clung to her, refusing to fade entirely. Maggie had nightmares, screaming in terror at the memories that haunted her. He would rush to her side, holding her close until her breathing steadied. One evening, after a tough day, Jake found Maggie sitting on the porch, staring out at the fields. He could see the battle brewing in her mind, struggles for which she felt entirely alone. "I'm scared he'll come looking for me," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake crouched beside her. "Listen, I won't let anyone take you away again. You're safe here." He reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of connection bloom in the space between them. But fear is a tenacious foe, and it wasn't long before Jake saw signs of it creeping in again. Even on the brightest days, Maggie would flinch at loud noises or sudden movements, a reflex honed by trauma. Every reaction felt like a chisel striking the ice around her heart. Jake could feel her battles, and it tore him apart. Then came the day when everything exploded. Jake was out in the fields, tending to the livestock, when he spotted a familiar truck parked at the end of the long dirt road leading to the ranch. His stomach dropped, a sickening twist of dread unfurling inside him. He shouted, racing back toward the barn where he found her playing with a stray cat. "Get inside." Her eyes widened, sensing the urgency in his voice. The two of them sprinted into the farmhouse, Jake locking the door behind them. She asked, panic in her voice. "It's your dad," Jake said, his heart racing. They dashed into the small pantry, the cool darkness wrapping around them like a cloak. Jake could hear the truck engine rumble as the door slammed shut outside. "Maggie, listen," he whispered, holding her close. "You are safe." The pounding on the door began, hard and relentless. "Maggie," her father's voice, harsh and demanding, cut through the still air, each word a blade aimed at their fragile sanctuary. Maggie's voice trembled against his chest. "We wait for him to leave. I'll protect you," he promised, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He felt small and powerless, but his resolve fueled a fierce protectiveness. Time stretched as they huddled together, the shadows deepening over them. Maggie whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He won't. Just stay close to me," Jake murmured, heart racing as some primal sense of instinct urged him to keep her safe at all costs. Outside, the pounding continued relentlessly. "You think you can just hide from me?" His voice echoed, laced with rage. "Please don't let him in," Maggie pleaded, clutching Jake's sleeve tightly. Minutes felt like hours as the doorframe groaned under the pressure. Jake held his breath, both terrified and determined. Finally, he heard a distant rumble in the distance, another truck approaching. "Maggie, listen," he said swiftly, scanning the room. "We're about to get some help." As the new truck pulled up, Jake's heart raced anew. He grasped Maggie's shoulders, forcing eye contact. "You're safe." The sound of footsteps echoed outside, a sharp contrast to the pounding that had just filled the air. The door creaked open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, both scanning the room with practiced ease. One of them called, his breath a mix of concern and urgency. "They're here for you, Maggie," Jake whispered, gently leading her out to the living room, the officers watching her carefully. Maggie emerged, hesitantly stepping into the light. Jake felt the urge to shield her from everything, but he knew this was a necessary step. "Hey there," one officer said kindly, kneeling to her level. "We're here to help you." "Maggie," she whispered, her small voice barely audible. "All right, Maggie, you're safe now." "There are people who can take care of you," he said, his tone gentle. The other officer turned to Jake. "We got the call." Jake nodded, frustration tightening in his gut. "He's outside." The officers moved to the door, and Jake could see the tension etched on their faces. Seconds stretched out as they prepared to face the man outside, the man who had shattered Maggie's innocence. "Stay here," one of the officers ordered. They opened the door and stepped outside, facing the man who had inflicted so much pain. Jake glanced at Maggie, who stood frozen, eyes wide with apprehension. "You're safe," he whispered again, and her small hand slipped into his. He felt the strength of their bond as if it could shatter the darkness threatening to surround them. Minutes seemed to stretch into hours. Finally, the sounds outside began to fade. Jake watched as one officer walked back in, a sense of relief washing over him. "The situation is under control. We have him detained," he announced, giving Jake a sympathetic glance. The weight Jake had carried began to lift, and Maggie's shoulders barely relaxed. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with vulnerability. She asked, "We'll make sure you're safe," he vowed, kneeling down to meet her gaze. Days turned into weeks, and as they maneuvered through the fog of that chaotic moment, Jake felt new waves of determination swell within him. Maggie began to trust again, her laughter slowly returning, echoing through the ranch. They crafted new routines, laughter spilling over the edges as they painted their lives with resilience. One day, Jake took Maggie out to the horse paddock, showing her how to care for the animals. She bounded through the grass, laughter bubbling over as the horses trotted towards them. She asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Sure thing," Jake replied, swinging her up onto Rusty, a gentle horse with a warm temperament. He shouted as he led them through the fields, Maggie squealing in delight. For a moment, the troubles of the past faded away. But there were still days when shadows crept back in. Moments when she would wake up screaming, trapped in memories she couldn't escape. Jake would hold her until she calmed, whispering words of reassurance, his heart aching for her plight. Then one evening, as they sat on the porch beneath the vast blanket of stars, Maggie turned to him with thoughtful eyes. She began cautiously. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her fears. "If he does," he said steadily, "we'll be ready for him." Maggie nodded, and Jake felt the warmth of determination settle within his chest. "You've shown so much courage, Maggie." As the days turned into nights, their bond deepened, knitted together by trust and love. They faced the world head-on, fortifying themselves against the dangers that loomed. Jake knew they would continue to grow, continuing to build their life on the foundation of hope they had forged together. They were unbreakable two souls united by hardship, filled with resilience and light. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the Double J Ranch, Jake looked at Maggie's smiling face and knew that together they could overcome anything. They had become a family, each day carving out a new path filled with love and laughter, turning the page on a painful chapter and embracing a brighter future. No matter what storms lay ahead, they would weather them together, two hearts standing firm against the dark, side by side, ready to meet whatever came next. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting the Double J Ranch in shades of gold and crimson, an idyllic setting that belied the tension brewing in the air. Jake Thompson stood at the entrance of his barn, wiping the sweat from his brow, the familiar sounds of cattle gently mooing, and the rustle of leaves calming him after a long day's work. But today, he sensed something was off, an unusual heaviness that crept alongside the evening shadows. It began as a faint noise, almost like the wind whispering through the barn. But then he heard it again, this time a soft whimper that sent a chill racing down his spine. He froze, his heart pounding. The barn was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place filled with comfort and familiarity. But now something lurked in the corners of that space, something unsettling. He called, his voice steady but filled with concern. Silence answered him, stretching taut like a drawn bow, ready to snap. With cautious steps, he ventured further into the dimly lit space, scanning every shadow, every creak of wood beneath his boots. That's when he saw her nestled between the bales of hay was a small girl, her tiny frame curled up as if trying to disappear. Jake knelt down, heart racing. She looked no older than 6 or 7, her hair a tangled mess, her clothes in tatters. His stomach churned at the sight of her, helplessness splaying itself across his heart. "Hey there," he said softly, hoping to soothe her. She stirred, blinking up at him, fear evident in her dark eyes. "Maggie," she whispered, a tiny voice barely breaking through the silence of the barn. "Maggie," he repeated, the name anchoring itself in his mind. "You're safe here, I promise." She flinched at his voice, diving deeper into the hay as if it could swallow her whole. "I'm hungry," she said after a moment, and those words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just physical hunger. He could feel the weight of her despair, an emptiness that went beyond food. "All right, Maggie," he said, feeling a fierce determination swell within him. Taking her hand, he led her out into the fading light. The fresh air was a stark contrast to the musty barn, and he couldn't shake the almost protective instinct bubbling up deep inside. He wanted to shield her from everything, even the past that haunted her. As they reached the farmhouse, the kitchen enveloped them with warmth and the enticing aromas of a meal just finished. He quickly rummaged through the refrigerator, desperate to prepare something nice. Eggs, bacon, and toast filled the plate as he placed it in front of her. "Eat up," he encouraged, watching her eyes widen at the sight of food. The way she hesitated before diving into the meal suggested a deep-seated disbelief. He couldn't quite fathom the kind of life that had stripped her of such a simple joy. It didn't take long for her to devour everything in front of her, and Jake felt a small flicker of hope ignite in his chest. He ventured cautiously, wanting to peel back the layers of her story like the skins of an onion, but fearing what might lie underneath. She wasn't safe," Maggie murmured, her little voice trembling. "Dad got angry." The words were clipped, painful, each syllable a painful reminder of fear and loss. Jake felt a rage bubble inside him, against the man who had hurt her, against a world that allowed this to happen. "You don't have to go back to him, Maggie," he promised, his voice firm but gentle. "You're safe here now." As the day drew to a close, Jake led Maggie to a small room he had prepared. It was cozy, adorned with a quilt he had found lying forgotten in the attic, and the warmth of a new beginning lingered in the air. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said, watching her enter the space with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. The next few days passed in a blur of laughter and slow healing. Maggie began to adapt to life at the ranch, her laughter ringing out when she helped Jake with the chores. She was cautious but curious, slowly opening up like a flower budding in the sun. They planted a small garden together, and with each passing day, she felt more like a part of Jake's world. But even amidst the laughter, the shadows of her trauma crept in, manifesting in the way her body would tense at sudden noises or the grip of her small hands whenever the wind howled through the trees. Jake noticed that she would often flinch, and it broke his heart each time. "You're safe here, Maggie," he would whisper, holding her close when the fear would seize her. One rainy evening, as they sat on the porch watching the drops dance on the ground, Maggie turned to him, her expression solemn. She asked, vulnerability painted across her sweet face. His gut twisted at the thought. "If he comes looking for you, I'll make sure you're protected. You're part of my family now," Jake replied, a fierce conviction in his voice. In that moment, he realized that their bond had morphed into something profound, something deeper than he had anticipated. But the man would eventually come. Jake could feel it in the air, a storm brewing on the horizon. It wasn't long before his fears became a reality. One day, a truck pulled up, its tires crunching against the gravel. Jake's heart sank as he recognized the vehicle, the same one that had haunted Maggie's past. Panic surged through him. He shouted, urgency propelling him forward. She asked, eyes wide with confusion. He insisted, practically pushing her into the farmhouse and locking the door behind them. Maggie's small hands trembled as she looked up at him. "Is he?" Jake's heart raced as he could hear footsteps approaching, the sound familiar and terrifying. "I won't let him take you," he assured her, enveloping her in a protective embrace. Came a voice from outside, rough and angry, laced with desperation. The man bellowed for her, demanding entry like it was his right. "You can't hide, sweetheart." Jake's instincts screamed at him to protect her. "Stay close to me," he whispered, feeling Maggie cling to him as they both peered through the window, watching the man pace outside with an intensity that made Jake's stomach churn. "Please, don't let him take me," she whimpered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I promise you I'll keep you safe," he said, the fierce resolve setting his jaw. And then it happened. The door slammed against its frame and the man began demanding entry, anger coursing through his every word. "Maggie!" They locked themselves in the pantry, the world outside boiling with tension. Jake could hear his heart pounding in his ears as Maggie placed her small hand on his arm, drawing strength from the connection. She implored, fear spilling over in her voice. Forcing down his own fear, Jake pressed his lips together, gathering every ounce of bravery he had. "We wait," he said, glancing at her with an encouraging nod. Moments stretched into what felt like a lifetime, the man's voice echoing ominously in the background. "Maggie, I won't hurt you." But Jake raised a finger to his lips, reminding her to stay quiet, forcing himself to focus not on the noise, but on the small girl beside him. He felt her trembling body against his, a reminder of everything they had fought against and everything that still lay ahead. Finally, just as despair threatened to pull him under, they heard the sound of approaching sirens. Relief surged through him. "That's it, help is here," he whispered, feeling her tense body begin to relax. The man outside roared, frustration evident in his tone. "You think you can keep her from me?" But Jake refused to yield. With renewed determination, he pressed his body against the door as he spotted uniformed officers stepping onto the property. They moved carefully, taking in the scene before stepping closer to confront the man. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Maggie, ensuring she stayed close while the world outside began to settle into chaos. The officers moved in swiftly, the tension palpable, and Jake felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as they began speaking to the man. It was an intense, electric moment, an unsteady balance of hope and fear. Eventually, the situation calmed. The officers led the man away in handcuffs as the tension inside the farmhouse slowly unraveled. "Maggie," Jake said, finding her still clinging to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You did it." Once the chaos ebbed, the officers turned to Maggie, their eyes filled with warmth. "You're safe now." But Jake knelt beside her, cupping her face in his hand. "You won't have to face him again," he said, sorrow and promise swirling in his voice. Days turned into weeks as they rebuilt their lives. The summer sun painted a fresh canvas for them, illuminating the spaces where laughter and joy returned. They planted their garden together, watched the horses roam the pastures, and filled the farmhouse with the kind of warmth that had been absent for so long. Maggie flourished, and Jake felt a deep sense of pride swelling within him. They celebrated small victories, her first day on Rusty, their first harvest, each moment stitched together like a patchwork quilt of resilience. Yet not every day was easy. Some nights Maggie would wake screaming, haunted by shadows she couldn't shake. Jake would scramble to her side, wrapping her in his arms and whispering reassurance until she calmed again. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch, the stars twinkling overhead, Maggie turned to him, her expression thoughtful. She asked, her voice small. Jake cupped her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "If he comes back, I'll be ready," he said firmly. The bond between them had grown stronger, woven together by shared experiences, deep-rooted trust, and an unwavering sense of love. The dark clouds of the past had begun to fade, replaced by the vibrant colors of hope. As summer melted into fall, Jake knew they had created something beautiful amidst the chaos. They had built a sanctuary, a place where laughter replaced tears and warmth overpowered fear. Every day was a testament to their strength, a reminder of how far they had come. They faced fears, challenges, and the unknown, but together they became an unbreakable unit. Their journey wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. And as the sun set on another day, casting a golden glow over the Double J Ranch, Jake looked down at Maggie's radiant smile, and for the first time in what felt like eternity, he truly believed they had forged a path toward a brighter future. They were not just a rancher and a girl, they were family standing resolute against the storms. United, they had turned a painful past into a beautiful tapestry, each thread woven tight with love, resilience, and an unwavering spirit that could withstand anything. With each passing day, they stepped further into the future, hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for them. They were survivors, warriors against the darkness, but together they held the power of light, love, and unbreakable bonds. Jake Thompson sighed as he stepped out of his dusty pickup truck, the sun hanging low over the Double J Ranch, casting golden light across the fields. It was a routine evening, the kind he'd experienced countless times before, where the sounds of nature filled the air, the gentle mooing of cattle, the distant whinny of horses. But today, an unsettling feeling crept into his gut, a sense that something wasn't quite right. As he made his way to the barn, he heard it, a faint whimpering sound slicing through the serene atmosphere. Jake halted in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. The barn was meant to be a place of peace, a sanctuary, but now it felt heavy with an unknown dread. He called out, his voice steady but edged with concern. The sound continued, a soft plea bounding off the walls like a desperate echo. He stepped closer, the creaking wood beneath his boots amplifying the silence around him. In the dim light, he spotted her, a small girl curled up in a corner, her frail body seemingly swallowed by the hay bales. His heart ached at the sight. She couldn't be more than 6 or 7, and the state of her clothes told an unsettling story of neglect. "Hey there," he said, kneeling down to her level. The girl blinked up at him, fear shimmering in her wide brown eyes. "Maggie," she whispered, a fragile sound that melted in the air. "Maggie," he echoed, the name settling in his heart. "You're safe here." Tentatively, she uncurling herself, the rise and fall of her small chest echoing her anxiety. "I'm hungry," she managed, her voice small yet heavy with despair. Jake's heart broke at her words. It wasn't just hunger, it was the weight of loneliness and fear that thrummed just beneath the surface. "Let's get you something to eat," he said, extending his hand, a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Once outside, Maggie hesitated. But as the warm light drenched them both, she took his hand, and they walked toward the farmhouse. The familiar scent of grass and earth wafted around them, but all Jake could think about was the girl beside him, fragile, scared, yet somehow still holding onto the spark of life. Inside the kitchen, the warmth created a stark contrast to the chill he had sensed in the barn. Jake moved quickly, rummaging through the fridge to find whatever scraps he could whip into a filling meal: eggs, bacon, toast, and a heaping glass of milk. He set the plate in front of her, watching with rapt attention as her eyes widened, disbelief dancing within them. "It's all yours," he said gently. Tentatively at first, she picked up the fork, and something inside Jake shifted. Watching her devour the food was like witnessing the resurrection of a lost soul. Each bite filled Maggie not just with nourishment but with a flicker of hope. As she ate, Jake couldn't hold back the questions flooding his mind. "Can you tell me what happened, Maggie?" Her expression shifted, the shadows creeping back into her eyes. "There, not safe," she murmured, the words barely escaping her throat. "Dad got angry." A storm of emotions churned within him. Anger swelled for the man who had hurt her. Jake felt an overwhelming need to protect this fragile girl from whatever horrors she had endured. "You're safe now," he promised, leaning closer. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Maggie's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded slowly, a flicker of relief softening her features. Days turned into weeks, and Jake began to carve a routine around both of their lives. The ranch became a sanctuary, filled with laughter, chores, and the warmth of companionship. He introduced Maggie to the animals, showing her the cows, the horses, their quirks, and their heart's end with each passing day. She blossomed. She laughed more freely now, her spirit unfurling like a flower reaching for the sun. They worked side by side, planting a small garden at the edge of the barn. Early mornings were filled with the faint whir of insects and the gentle songbirds chirping in harmony. But even in that flourishing light, shadows clung to Maggie. She would sometimes flinch at loud noises. The clanging of metal, the sudden call of a bird, in Jake's heart would twinge at the reminder of her past, anchored in fear and uncertainty. During those moments, he would pull her close, wrapping his arms around her and whispering words of reassurance. "You're safe. I promise you're home," he would say, willing her to believe. And then came the day that felt like a dark cloud settling over them. Jake was out by the fence, adjusting the wires to keep the cattle safe, when he noticed a strange vehicle approaching. The truck was old and dirty, but the sight sent a jolt of fear through him like an old ghost rising up from the past. He shouted, heart racing, as he sprinted back to the house. She asked, confusion etched on her face. "It's your dad," he said, desperation spilling from every word. They rushed inside, locking the door behind them just as the truck's engine sputtered to a halt. Maggie's wide eyes searched his, pleading for reassurance. "Stay close to me," Jake ordered, moving them toward the back of the house as the sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. Her father's voice, harsh and filled with a menacing urgency, rang out. "Let me in, I just want to talk." The terror in Maggie's eyes gripped him. She whimpered, her voice shaking. "No, I promise you he won't touch you," Jake said, his own heart pounding as he felt the weight of the moment settle between them. They huddled in the pantry, the dim light barely illuminating the shallow breaths they took. Outside, Jake could hear the anger in her father's voice, demanding entry, and that protective urge roared back in him. Just then, he caught a glimpse of movement through the window. The man was stalking around the house, a frantic energy radiating from him, searching for his daughter. He yelled, and Jake's gut twisted at the sound. Maggie pressed herself against him, trembling. "Just stay quiet." "I'll keep you safe," he promised, feeling utterly powerless yet determined. The world outside felt like a storm about to break, and he was ready to shield her from every bit of it. But as the confrontation escalated outside, uncertainty gnawed at the edges of Jake's resolve. What if he couldn't protect her? What if he failed? When the lights of sirens finally pierced the night sky, relief surged through him. He exclaimed as hope bubbled to the surface. Jake quickly checked on Maggie, who looked almost shockingly small against the backdrop of their hiding spot. "Help is here," he said, his voice low and steady. The pounding at the door finally ceased, replaced by authoritative voices. The officers stepped inside, quickly assessing the situation. One of them called out, and a wave of relief swept through him. As they moved outside to confront the man who had instilled so much fear, Jake clutched Maggie, the intensity of the moment enveloping them both. "Stay close," he whispered, his heart pounding like a drum. They watched as the officers took control of the situation. The man was brought back into view, handcuffed and seemingly rattled. A sense of triumph swelled within Jake. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they could reclaim their life. One of the officers said gently, kneeling before her, "Are you all right?" "Yes," she replied softly, her voice fragile but resolute. The power of that connection anchored them both, the warmth of unspoken promises filling the air. In the days that followed, they navigated through a haze of emotions. Maggie began to adapt, slowly allowing the laughter to bubble back into their lives. But the shadows of that storm still lurked on the edges, always threatening to return. Jake took extra precautions, putting up stronger locks and installing security systems. They transformed the barn into a getaway, a place where laughter could drown out fear. They spent hours together, planting flowers, taking care of the horses, and creating a safe haven built on trust and love. But one day, while they worked in the garden, an unexpected visitor arrived, a social worker sent to check on Maggie. She arrived with a kind smile, but as they spoke, Jake could sense the questions weighing on the air. "Maggie, I just want to know you're okay," she said gently. Her words stirred something within Maggie, a deeper fear that could still shake the foundations of the life they were building. She asked, voice trembling. "I'll protect you," Jake interjected fiercely, not wanting her to feel abandoned. The social worker noted her response, watching their interaction closely. "It's important to understand that your safety comes first, Maggie." But as the conversation continued, Maggie's eyes drifted to the window, watching as the resting daylight turned dark outside. Jake's heart sank. It was almost too much pressure on her young shoulders, and he knew they were on the precipice of something life-altering. Then came the day when Jake felt a familiar unease wash over him. Sitting on the porch, he watched the sun dip below the horizon. That unsettling feeling returned, a nagging thought that something was off. Before he could shake it off, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed down the driveway. His stomach dropped as he recognized that truck again. Shouted, feeling panic erupt inside him. But it might already be too late. The door swung open roughly, and he felt the air grow heavy as the figure stepped out. It was her father, rage emanating from him like a dark storm cloud. Jake's heart raced, fear and responsibility thrumming through his veins. "Stay behind me," he instructed Maggie, who stood frozen in fear. The man bellowed, his voice gravelly and hostile. Jake shouted back, standing firm, adrenaline coursing through him. "You've hurt her." The man clenched his fists, eyes wild with anger. "You're just a rancher. You think you can keep her away from me?" A chill ran down Jake's spine as he faced the man who had been a prison for Maggie, a tyrant who sought to take her life back under his control. The shadows of the moment stretched long and dark between them, a stark contrast to everything he had fought for. The world felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos as tension tightened around them. What would this confrontation mean for Maggie? The sound of sirens in the distance gave Jake a glimmer of hope, but with every passing second, he knew they had to act. He yelled, the weight of the promise echoing profoundly through him. The sun plunged beyond the horizon, leaving them shrouded in darkness, a darkness that was deepened by uncertainty. They stood there, locked in a life-altering confrontation and unyielding determination. In that moment, Jake knew that the fate they had fought so hard to build teetered on the brink. He felt the fire within him rise, fueled by the need to protect the girl who had become his world. And just like that, they were poised at a crossroads. The sun was sinking below the horizon, casting the Double J Ranch in shades of gold and crimson, an idyllic setting that belied the tension brewing in the air. Jake Thompson stood at the entrance of his barn, wiping the sweat from his brow, the familiar sounds of cattle gently mooing, and the rustle of leaves calming him after a long day's work. But today, an unsettling feeling crept into his gut, a sense that something wasn't quite right. As he made his way to the barn, he heard it, a faint whimpering sound slicing through the serene atmosphere. Jake halted in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. The barn was meant to be a sanctuary, a place filled with comfort and familiarity. But now something lurked in the corners of that space, something unsettling. He called, his voice steady yet filled with concern. The sound continued, a soft plea bouncing off the walls like a desperate echo. He stepped closer, the creaking wood beneath his boots amplifying the silence around him. In the dim light, he spotted her, a small girl curled up in a corner, her frail body seemingly swallowed by the hay bales. His heart ached at the sight. She couldn't be more than 6 or 7, and the state of her clothes told an unsettling story of neglect. Jake knelt down, heart racing. She looked up at him, fear shimmering in her wide brown eyes. "Maggie," she whispered, a fragile sound that melted in the air. "Maggie," he repeated, feeling an ache blossom inside him. "You're safe here." Tentatively, she uncurling herself, the rise and fall of her small chest echoing her anxiety. "I'm hungry," she managed, her voice small yet heavy with despair. Jake's heart broke at her words. It wasn't just hunger, it was the weight of loneliness and fear that thrummed just beneath the surface. "All right, Maggie," he said, feeling a fierce determination swell within him. Taking her hand, he led her out into the fading light. The fresh air was a stark contrast to the musty barn, and he couldn't shake the almost protective instinct bubbling up deep inside. What kind of life had brought her here? Who had hurt her? As they reached the farmhouse, the warm light spilled over them, and he quickly prepared a plate of food. Eggs, bacon, and a glass of milk sat waiting for the girl who looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He placed the plate in front of her, watching as her eyes widened, disbelief dancing within them. "Go ahead," he urged. The moment she picked up that fork, Jake couldn't look away. Watching her devour the food was like witnessing the resurrection of a lost soul. Each bite filled Maggie not just with nourishment, but with a flicker of hope. As she ate, Jake couldn't hold back the questions flooding his mind. "Can you tell me what happened, Maggie?" Her expression shifted, the shadows creeping back into her eyes. "There. Not safe," she murmured, the words barely escaping her throat. "Dad got angry." A storm of emotions churned within him. Anger swelled for the man who had hurt her. Jake felt an overwhelming need to protect this fragile girl from whatever horrors she had endured. "You're safe now," he promised, leaning closer. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Maggie's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded slowly, a flicker of relief softening her features. Days turned into weeks, and Jake began to carve a routine around both of their lives. The ranch became a sanctuary, filled with laughter, chores, and the warmth of companionship. He introduced Maggie to the animals, showing her the cows, the horses, their quirks, and their hearts. With each passing day, she blossomed. She laughed more freely now, her spirit unfurling like a flower reaching for the sun. They worked side by side, planting a small garden at the edge of the barn. Early mornings were filled with the faint whir of insects and the gentle songbirds chirping in harmony. But even in that flourishing light, shadows clung to Maggie. She would sometimes flinch at loud noises. The clanging of metal, the sudden call of a bird in Jake's heart would twinge at the reminder of her past, anchored in fear and uncertainty. During those moments, he would pull her close, wrapping his arms around her and whispering words of reassurance. "You're safe. I promise you're home," he would say, willing her to believe. And then came the day that felt like a dark cloud settling over them. Jake was out by the fence, adjusting the wires to keep the cattle safe when he noticed a strange vehicle approaching. The truck was old and dirty, but the sight sent a jolt of fear through him like an old ghost rising up from the past. He shouted, heart racing as he sprinted back to the house. She asked, confusion etched on her face. "It's your dad," he said, desperation spilling from every word. They rushed inside, locking the door behind them just as the truck's engine sputtered to a halt. Maggie's wide eyes searched his, pleading for reassurance. "Stay close to me," Jake ordered, moving them toward the back of the house as the sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. Her father's voice, harsh and filled with a menacing urgency, rang out. "Let me in, I just want to talk." The terror in Maggie's eyes gripped him. She whimpered, her voice shaking. "No, I promise you he won't touch you," Jake said, his own heart pounding as he felt the weight of the moment settle between them. They huddled in the pantry, the dim light barely illuminating the shallow breaths they took. Outside, Jake could hear the anger in her father's voice, demanding entry, and that protective urge roared back in him. Just then, he caught a glimpse of movement through the window. The man was stalking around the house, a frantic energy radiating from him, searching for his daughter. He yelled, and Jake's gut twisted at the sound. Maggie pressed herself against him, trembling. "Just stay quiet." "I'll keep you safe," he promised, feeling utterly powerless yet determined. The world outside felt like a storm about to break, and he was ready to shield her from every bit of it. But as the confrontation escalated outside, uncertainty gnawed at the edges of Jake's resolve. What if he couldn't protect her? What if he failed? When the lights of sirens finally pierced the night sky, relief surged through him. He exclaimed as hope bubbled to the surface. Jake quickly checked on Maggie, who looked almost shockingly small against the backdrop of their hiding spot. "Help is here," he said, his voice low and steady. The pounding at the door finally ceased, replaced by authoritative voices. The officers stepped inside, quickly assessing the situation. One of them called out, and a wave of relief swept through him. As they moved outside to confront the man who had instilled so much fear, Jake clutched Maggie, the intensity of the moment enveloping them both. "Stay close," he whispered, his heart pounding like a drum. They watched as the officers took control of the situation. The man was brought back into view, handcuffed and seemingly rattled. A sense of triumph swelled within Jake. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they could reclaim their life. One of the officers said gently, kneeling before her, "Are you all right?" "Yes," she replied softly, her voice fragile but resolute. The power of that connection anchored them both, the warmth of unspoken promises filling the air. In the days that followed, they navigated through a haze of emotions. Maggie began to adapt, slowly allowing the laughter to bubble back into their lives. But the shadows of that storm still lurked on the edges, always threatening to return. Jake took extra precautions, putting up stronger locks and installing security systems. They transformed the barn into a getaway, a place where laughter could drown out fear. They spent hours together, planting flowers, taking care of the horses, and creating a safe haven built on trust and love. But one day, while they worked in the garden, an unexpected visitor arrived, a social worker sent to check on Maggie. She arrived with a kind smile, but as they spoke, Jake could sense the questions weighing on the air. "Maggie, I just want to know you're okay," she said gently. Her words stirred something within Maggie, a deeper fear that could still shake the foundations of the life they were building. She asked, voice trembling. "I'll protect you," Jake interjected fiercely, not wanting her to feel abandoned. The social worker noted her response, watching their interaction closely. "It's important to understand that your safety comes first, Maggie." But as the conversation continued, Maggie's eyes drifted to the window, watching as the resting daylight turned dark outside. Jake's heart sank. It was almost too much pressure on her young shoulders, and he knew they were on the precipice of something life-altering. Then came the day when Jake felt a familiar unease wash over him. Sitting on the porch, he watched the sun dip below the horizon. That unsettling feeling returned, a nagging thought that something was off. Before he could shake it off, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed down the driveway. His stomach dropped as he recognized that truck again. He shouted, feeling panic erupt inside him. But it might already be too late. The door swung open roughly, and he felt the air grow heavy as the figure stepped out. It was her father, rage emanating from him like a dark storm cloud. Jake's heart raced, fear and responsibility thrumming through his veins. "Stay behind me," he instructed Maggie, who stood frozen in fear. The man bellowed, his voice gravelly and hostile. Jake shouted back, standing firm, adrenaline coursing through him. "You've hurt her." The man clenched his fists, eyes wild with anger. "You're just a rancher. You think you can keep her from me?" A chill ran down Jake's spine as he faced the man who had been a prison for Maggie, a tyrant who sought to take her life back under his control. The shadows of the moment stretched long and dark between them, a stark contrast to everything he had fought for. The world felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos as tension tightened around them. What would this confrontation mean for Maggie? The sound of sirens in the distance gave Jake a glimmer of hope, but with every passing second, he knew they had to act. He yelled, the weight of the promise echoing profoundly through him. The sun plunged beyond the horizon, leaving them shrouded in darkness, a darkness that was deepened by uncertainty. They stood there, locked in a life-altering confrontation with unyielding determination. In that moment, Jake knew that the fate they had fought so hard to build teetered on the brink. He felt the fire within him rise, fueled by the need to protect the girl who had become his world. And just like that, they were poised at a crossroads. The past had returned to haunt them, a storm looming on the horizon, and it was far from over.